The day my father's will was finally probated, I found a small wooden box he'd hidden behind a loose panel in his study wall. My brother David tossed it in the trash without a second glance, calling it junk. I fished it out that night, and inside was a handwritten note and a USB drive. The note read, "Catherine, do not trust him. Save yourself." By the end of that year, David was wearing a lab coat that said "Overdosed" on lies at Pill of Perjury Apothecary, counting tablets under my supervision, while every prescription label printed his federal fraud docket number. My name is Catherine. I was 48 years old when my father passed, a retired pharmacy technician with a chronic heart condition that meant I needed a precise daily cocktail of 3 different medications just to keep my pulse from running off the rails. I had worked 30 years in hospital pharmacies, never made a fortune, but I saved meticulously. My younger brother David was the family's golden child, the one who could talk his way into anything. When he came to me 5 years ago with a business plan for a small independent pharmacy and a promise that he'd handle the operations if I provided the capital, I believed him. I cashed out my entire 401k, all $145,000 of it, and put it down on a little shop on Maple Street. In return, David swore I would never have to pay for my heart meds again. That promise lasted about 18 months before the prescriptions stopped arriving. Our father, a retired machinist with a sharp mind and a deep distrust of people who talked too much, had died 6 months earlier. The funeral had been a quiet affair, just me, David, Lisa, and a handful of Dad's old co-workers from the tool and dye plant. David spent the whole reception cornering the estate attorney, a man named Harold Simmons who had drawn up Dad's simple will 20 years ago. David kept saying things like, "Dad wasn't in his right mind at the end, Harold. We should talk about a more equitable distribution." I stood by the casket and watched the whole performance, my grief hardening into something cold and wary. The will was held up in probate because David contested the executor, claiming the old man wasn't competent when he wrote it. For 6 months, David filed motion after motion, demanding a cognitive assessment, demanding access to Dad's safe deposit box, demanding that Harold be removed. Finally, the court ordered the release of that small safe deposit box. Harold said it contained personal effects and a handwritten letter, nothing of major financial value. David didn't believe it. He was convinced Dad had hidden a second fortune somewhere, a hoard of gold coins or bearer bonds, something worthy of his sense of entitlement. So the morning Harold was set to deliver the box to the house, David and his wife Lisa showed up like vultures, an hour early, already inside when I arrived from my apartment across town. They had let themselves in with David's old key. Lisa was standing in the kitchen, flipping through a stack of mail she'd pulled from my father's roll-top desk, her acrylic nails clicking against the envelopes. She was a real estate agent who always dressed like she was about to close a $1 million listing. Today it was a cream pantsuit and gold jewelry that clanked softly when she moved. She looked up and said, "We're here to help you, Catherine. You're obviously not in any state to handle this alone." I had been managing my own life just fine, but grief makes people see you as fragile. I let them think what they wanted. David emerged from the hallway in a tailored blazer and polished loafers and patted my shoulder like I was a child. "Catherine, we're going to get all this sorted out. Just leave the heavy lifting to us. First thing, we need a full property inventory for the probate judge. Harold will be here any minute, and I want to know what's in that box before he tries to squirrel anything away." He immediately started cataloging Dad's possessions, opening cabinets, muttering about valuation and liquidation. I followed them into the study, a room I had avoided since Dad's death because it still smelled like his pipe tobacco and machine oil, a blend of sweet cherry and sharp cutting fluid that made my throat tight. While David riffled through a file cabinet, Lisa started pulling books off the shelves, checking behind them as if the walls might hide a second will. She knocked over a framed photo of my mother, and the glass cracked, but she just stepped over it. I stood near the far corner, forcing myself to breathe evenly, when my eyes were drawn to a small wooden box, about the size of a cigar box, pushed behind a stack of old inventory ledgers from Dad's machine shop. It was simple, stained dark walnut, with a tiny brass clasp that had a faint patina of age. Something about the way it sat there, perfectly ordinary yet deliberate, made my pulse tick up. David noticed my gaze and yanked it out from behind the ledgers, scattering dust motes. He examined it for half a second, shook it to see if it rattled, and snorted. Looks like Dad's old junk. Toss it. He handed it to Lisa, who barely glanced at it before dropping it into a black garbage bag they had brought for clearing out clutter. The bag was already half full with what David considered worthless old tax returns, a broken pocket watch, a jar of marbles. I said nothing. My chest tightened, but I kept my face slack. I had learned long ago that arguing with David only made him dig in deeper, and if I showed too much interest, he would claim the box as his own just to spite me. Harold arrived a few minutes later, a stooped man in his 70s with a leather briefcase. He handed David a simple manila envelope containing a letter from Dad and the key to the safe deposit box, all of it exactly as described in the court filing. David was visibly disappointed. He and Lisa finished their sweep, declared the house in need of a professional estate sale, and left for their hotel, promising to return the next day with more resources. Later that night, after the streetlights clicked on and the neighborhood fell quiet, I pulled on a coat, grabbed a flashlight, and walked to the side of the house where the garbage cans stood. The bag was still there, slumped against the bin, rain-spattered and reeking from a leaky bag of kitchen trash that had been added on top. I lifted it out, the plastic slick and cold, and carried it into the garage. I carefully emptied the contents onto the old wooden workbench where Dad had once repaired lawnmower engines and sharpened drill bits. The box thudded against the wood, a solid, satisfying sound. I wiped it clean with a rag, noticing the tiny scratches around the clasp. The way the grain had worn smooth on one corner from years of handling. My father had held this box, opened it, closed it, many times. I unlatched it. Inside, tucked into a fitted velvet lining the color of old burgundy, were two items: a leather-bound journal with most of its pages blank, and a small black USB drive taped to the inside of the lid with a piece of beige masking tape that had yellowed with age. I opened the journal. The first pages were filled with Dad's notes about metallurgy tolerances, old recipes for cutting fluid, nothing personal, just the spidery handwriting of a machinist who documented everything. I flipped through, page after page of technical minutiae. Then I turned to the very last page. In my father's shaky, familiar handwriting, it said, "Catherine, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Do not trust David. He has been lying to you about the pharmacy. Save yourself. Check the drive." The ink had bled slightly, and I could almost feel the weight of his hand pressing down, the urgency of a dying man trying to protect his daughter. I slid the USB out, tucked it into my pocket, and closed the box. My hands were trembling. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Dad's old armchair with my laptop, the screen casting a pale glow, and plugged in the drive. It contained a single audio file, dated 8 months before he died. The metadata showed it had been recorded on a digital voice recorder, transferred to the drive, probably by Dad or someone he hired. I hit play. David's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable, the same smug cadence I'd heard 1,000 times. He was talking to a friend, a man named Greg, at what sounded like a bar. There was the clink of glasses, the murmur of a basketball game in the background. They were laughing, and then David said this. "I'm telling you, Greg, the old man is the only thing keeping that pharmacy afloat, and he doesn't even know I already sold the patient list to a mail-order outfit in Florida. Got 50 grand for it, clean. And Catherine, sweet Catherine, keeps asking about her heart pills. I told her there's a supply chain issue. She's so trusting. Honestly, once the old man goes, I'll just let her prescriptions lapse permanently. She's a liability anyway. With her out of the picture, I own the whole thing, and I've got a buyer for the real estate already lined up." There was more, Greg chuckling, David describing the vacation he'd take with the proceeds, but I had to stop it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely click the trackpad. He had stopped filling my prescriptions not because of supply issues, not because of some temporary cash flow problem, but because he wanted me dead. He had traded my life for $50,000 and a beach trip, and he had sold hundreds of patients' private data, people who trusted that little pharmacy on Maple Street, to a faceless corporation. I sat there in the dark for a long time, the hum of the laptop fan the only sound, and I made a decision. I was going to dismantle him piece by piece, and I was going to do it so precisely that he would never see it coming. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family betrayal should have real consequences. Now back to that night. The next morning, David and Lisa arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, holding a binder and a tray of lattes. They had brought a contractor to estimate the house's value, and a young woman with a tablet who introduced herself as a senior relocation specialist. David sat across from me at the kitchen table and slid a folder toward me, while Lisa stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder like a campaign wife. Inside the folder were documents I immediately recognized from my years of reading pharmaceutical contracts: a durable power of attorney, a quitclaim deed for my house, and a consent form to consolidate the pharmacy's trust assets under his management. He smiled, all teeth and sympathy. "Catherine, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to let us handle the heavy lifting now. These are standard forms to protect you. You sign here, and here, and here, and we can make sure all of Dad's estate is settled without you having to worry about a thing. Plus, we'd love for you to come stay with us for a while. The guest house is empty, it's safe and quiet, and Lisa can cook for you. You shouldn't be alone right now." Lisa nodded with a smile that never reached her eyes. "We just want what's best for you, sweetie. You've been under so much strain." The words were perfectly calibrated, the performance honed. I looked at the papers and felt the USB drive pressing against my thigh, still in my pocket from the night before. I knew that if I signed even one of those documents, David could liquidate everything and leave me with nothing. And worse, he could petition the court for guardianship if I appeared unable to manage my affairs. So I did what my father's note had taught me. I played weak. I let my shoulders slump, let my voice go reedy and uncertain. "I'm just not ready, David. My head is still so foggy from the funeral. All these legal words, they swim on the page. Maybe next week." He patted my hand, his palm dry and cool. "Of course. Take your time, sis, but not too much. The probate judge gets antsy, and we don't want to lose the momentum on the property sale. I've got a developer very interested." He and Lisa exchanged a glance, a micro-expression that flashed and vanished: impatience, calculation, hunger. By the end of the week, after 3 more visits and a lot of soft pressure about how I shouldn't be rattling around that big empty house alone, I packed a small bag and moved into their guest house. It was a converted garage behind the main house, with a separate entrance, a kitchenette, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach and previous tenants' secrets. I locked the box, and the USB drive in a steel lockbox under the bed, tucked behind the extra sheets. Living in their orbit was an education in financial decay. The guest house had paper-thin walls, and I quickly learned that David and Lisa held their most ferocious arguments in the kitchen, which was adjacent to my new sleeping quarters. The first night, at 11:30, I heard Lisa slam what sounded like a credit card bill onto the granite counter and hiss, "Your float payment is 3 months late, David. If the bank calls again, I swear to God I will liquidate my own assets and leave you to choke on your debt. I'm not going down with this ship." David's voice, tight and explosive, answered, "It's handled. I just need the old woman to sign the release, and the whole property sale closes in 30 days. 1.2 million, Lisa. Keep your cool and let me work." Old woman. He meant me. He was referring to me as an obstacle, a piece of furniture that needed to be moved. I started keeping a log in a small notebook, recording dates, times, and snippets of conversation. Over the following weeks, page after page filled with their frantic phone calls, the dodged calls from creditors, the way David would yank his phone out of his pocket at 3 in the morning and whisper into it, "No, don't send the audit yet. Just push it to the next quarter. I'm telling you, 30 more days." I learned the rhythms of their panic, the names of the banks calling, the amount of the second mortgage they had taken on the main house, the car loan on Lisa's Mercedes that was 90 days past due. They lived in a house of cards, and David seemed to believe that one big score, my signature on a dotted line, would fix everything. But it never did. The spending didn't stop. I saw packages arrive daily, boxes from high-end department stores, a new espresso machine delivered by courier. They were hemorrhaging money on appearances, while the actual infrastructure of their lives rotted behind the scenes. The pharmacy itself was a ghost. I drove past it one afternoon, ostensibly to pick up a refill that would never come, and found the lights off, the gates pulled down, a yellow notice taped to the door that said "Business Operations Suspended by Order of the State Board of Pharmacy." I peered through the grimy window. The shelves were bare except for a few dusty bottles of expired cough syrup and a broken counting tray. I knew then that David had already stripped the inventory, sold it off to a wholesaler who paid in cash. I later confirmed this by pulling a copy of the pharmacy's last wholesale purchase order from a public database the state maintained. The date code showed a massive inventory order 8 months ago, enough to restock the entire store, and then after that, nothing. He had bled it dry in a single season. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at that empty storefront, and I felt a rage so pure and quiet it was like holding a tuning fork against my sternum. That pharmacy was my retirement, my safety net, and he had gutted it for cash. The breaking point came 3 weeks into my stay, when a kitchen pipe burst under the main house sink. I was in the hallway, ostensibly fetching a glass of water but really cataloging the pile of unopened mail on the sideboard, when I heard a sharp crack followed by a hissing spray. Water began gushing out from under the sink, pooling on the tile, and Lisa shrieked. David cursed and yanked open the cabinet doors, immediately getting drenched. Neither of them had the first clue where the shut-off valve was. They shouted at each other, blaming the other for not maintaining the house, while the water spread toward the living room carpet. I watched for a moment, then walked silently to the basement door, descended the rickety stairs, and found the main valve near the water heater. It was a gate valve with a red wheel, stiff from years of neglect. I turned it off with 2 clean wrenches of my wrists, the metal groaning but giving. The hissing upstairs stopped. Then I went back up, fetched my old tool bag from my truck, a canvas roll I'd kept since my maintenance days, and crawled under the sink to replace the burst section of copper pipe. I had spent 3 summers during pharmacy tech school working maintenance at a hospital, not just filing prescriptions, but actually fixing dialysis machines, rotating pumps, threading pipe, and learning the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. It took me 40 minutes to cut out the damaged section with a mini pipe cutter, use an emery cloth to clean the ends, flux the joints, and sweat a new piece into place with a propane torch I kept for emergencies. The flame licked blue and steady, the solder flowed smooth, and when I was done, the joint was clean and watertight. I told David to turn the main valve back on, and when he did, the repair held perfectly. I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag, and I saw David staring at me like I'd performed a magic trick. Lisa stood behind him, mouth slightly open, a dish towel dangling forgotten in her hand. "How do you know how to do that?" David asked, his voice carrying a note I hadn't heard before, something like suspicion mixed with grudging respect. I shrugged. "I used to fix things. It's not hard if you know the basics. The key is cleaning the copper properly before you flux it. If there's any oxidation, the solder won't bond." They had never held a wrench in their lives, and in that moment, I saw their competence for what it was, a brittle veneer over a hollow core. I filed that away. It meant they wouldn't notice when I started picking apart their lives with the same precision. I used that contrast to my advantage. A few days later, while they were out at a real estate open house Lisa was hosting, I went into David's home office. The door had a standard privacy lock, the kind you can pop with a thin screwdriver inserted into the small hole on the exterior knob. I used a precision flathead from my tool bag and had the door open in 10 seconds. Inside, the room was a testament to controlled chaos, a desk stacked with papers, a whiteboard covered in barely legible financial projections, and a tall 4-drawer filing cabinet in the corner secured with a cheap padlock. The padlock was a basic wafer lock, nothing sophisticated. I had kept a small lock-picking kit from my maintenance days, originally for opening electrical panels and pharmaceutical storage cabinets when keys went missing. A basic wafer lock was child's play. I used a tension wrench improvised from a bobby pin, bending the flat end into a slightly angled tip, and a half-diamond pick the size of a fingernail. I inserted the tension wrench, applied light torque, and raked the pick across the wafers 3 times. On the 4th pass, the lock gave way with a satisfying click that I felt more than heard. The padlock fell open. The top drawer was stuffed with hanging folders labeled with color-coded tabs, tax returns, business licenses, loan documents. But the real gold was in the bottom drawer, a heap of papers that had been run through a crosscut shredder and then, inexplicably, dumped back into the drawer. David hadn't even emptied the shredder bin properly. He had shredded evidence of his fraud and then stored the evidence of his fraud in his own filing cabinet, perhaps thinking that shredded paper was inert. I carefully lifted the shredded strips, laying them out on the floor like a forensic puzzle. Some were credit card statements, some were bank notices, and then I found the pieces of a promissory note for a $200,000 line of credit from a regional bank called First Regional, secured against the pharmacy's real estate, with my name printed as a co-guarantor. The paper was heavy, watermarked, and the shredder had diced it into confetti. But crosscut shredders have a pattern. The strips were about 1.5 inches long and 1/4 inch wide, and with patience, many of the letters were still readable. I worked for nearly 3 hours, gluing nothing, just carefully aligning strips on the floor using the text orientation and the tiny alignment marks from the shredder's blades. I reconstructed the entire signature block. The signature on the bottom right was a clumsy forgery, better than a child's but not by much. The slant was wrong, the loop of the C in my name was too tight, and the pressure was uneven. I had sample of my own signature on an old pharmacy license in my wallet, and the forgery was laughable. I pieced together enough to see the loan had been funded to an account at an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands under the name L&D Holdings. Later cross-referencing would reveal L&D Holdings was a shell company with a single director listed in the registry, David Warner, and a registered address that turned out to be a mail forwarding service in Georgetown. I also found a shredded copy of a patient list sale agreement, signed by David and the CEO of a mail-order pharmacy in Fort Lauderdale called Coastal RX Solutions. The agreement detailed the transfer of over 400 patient profiles, including dates of birth, medication histories, insurance billing codes, and home addresses. The sale price was listed as $57,000, with a recurring monthly kickback of 3% of any prescriptions subsequently filled through the mail-order service. Every single one of those patients had trusted that little pharmacy to keep their private data safe. David had sold them for less than the price of a mid-range sedan. I photographed every reconstructed document with my phone, using a small tripod I kept for old family photos and a desk lamp positioned at a low angle to eliminate glare. I took 52 images, making sure every shred of text was legible. Then I carefully swept the shreds back into the bin, relocked the padlock using the same picking technique in reverse, and closed the office door without a trace. That night, I uploaded everything to a secure cloud drive with 2-factor authentication, and then emailed a compressed set to myself using an encrypted account. I was building a war chest of evidence, but I knew I needed an ally who could make it stick in a court of law. I needed someone with investigative authority and a jurisdictional interest. That ally appeared the very next morning. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, calm and professional, said, "MS. Warner, my name is Margaret Chen. I'm a senior compliance officer at First Regional Bank. Am I speaking to Catherine Warner, co-guarantor on a commercial loan for Maple Street Pharmacy?" I paused, feeling a rush of adrenaline that made my already unstable heart flutter. "Yes, but I never signed for any loan." There was a beat of silence. That's what our fraud detection flagged. The signature on file doesn't match the exemplar you used when you opened your personal savings account with us 12 years ago. We've been monitoring a series of suspicious transactions on the pharmacy's line of credit. Cash advances of $9,000, $15,000, then 4 more, all wired to a bank in Grand Cayman. There's also a sudden spike in non-sufficient funds notices, and the account has been frozen 3 times in the last quarter. MS. Warner, I think you're being exploited. I'd like to meet. We agreed to meet at a diner off the interstate, a place with no connection to either of our professional lives, where the only witnesses would be truckers and the waitress who never refilled your coffee without being asked. I wore a baseball cap and no makeup, and I arrived an hour early to secure a booth in the back. When Margaret walked in, she was exactly what I expected. A woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense haircut, a simple blazer, and a leather satchel that looked like it had seen a decade of depositions. She ordered black coffee and got straight to business. I handed her a thumb drive with all the evidence I'd gathered, the photos of the forged note, the patient list sale agreement, the audio file of David's barroom confession, and the detailed log of conversations I'd overheard from the guest house. She listened to a sample of the audio on her tablet, earbuds in, and her expression went from professional concern to steely anger. "This is actionable," she said. "But what's going to really land him in federal prison is the fact that he's been wiring bank fraud proceeds across state lines and through an offshore conduit. The FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force is already building a case on a network of pill mill schemes in this county, pharmacies selling patient lists and billing fake prescriptions. Your evidence gives us the direct link we needed to connect David Warner to a bigger money laundering pipeline. But we need one more thing. We need him on tape, in a controlled environment, trying to coerce you into signing a release that would trigger the trust's transfer clause. Can you get him into a bank conference room? I said I could. And then Margaret told me something that made the whole room tilt for a moment. She slid a document across the table. It was a trust instrument my father had established years ago, back when I first bought the pharmacy. I had known vaguely about the trust, but Dad had handled the details and I had trusted him. Now I learned that he, in his infinite suspicion, had structured the trust with a dead man's switch. The pharmacy building and its business license were held in an irrevocable trust that required the written, notarized consent of both beneficiaries, me and David, for any sale, transfer, or encumbrance of the assets. And there was another clause, buried in paragraph 12, dense with legal language. If either beneficiary attempted to encumber or transfer the assets unilaterally, or if a beneficiary was found to have engaged in fraud regarding the trust assets, the trust would freeze all assets immediately, and sole control would revert to the non-offending beneficiary, pending a circuit court review. David had been trying desperately to get me to sign a release so he could bypass that exact trigger. The moment he presented a forged or coerced signature to close a sale, the trust would lock him out and hand the keys back to me automatically. But he didn't know that yet. Margaret said the bank had flagged the suspicious activity specifically because the trust's compliance language required the bank to verify signatures on any major transfer. The forgery had tripped the alarm. My father, a man who never finished high school but understood metal fatigue and the exact torque at which a bolt will shear, had engineered a failsafe that would outlast his own life. I left that diner with a clear mission. That week, I made a point of letting my health visibly deteriorate. I stopped filling my own prescriptions entirely, having already stockpiled a small emergency supply from a different pharmacy under an alias David didn't know about. I knew the symptoms would show: the pallor, the shortness of breath after climbing a single flight of stairs, the occasional dizzy spell that made me grab the wall. I wanted David to see me as a woman too weak and too desperate to resist. He bought it completely. He started bringing me tea in the evenings, checking on me with exaggerated tenderness, and I could see the calculation behind his eyes. 3 days before his creditor deadline, he came to the guest house with a fresh stack of papers, his voice dripping with false concern. "Catherine, I've found a way to save us all. There's a buyer for the pharmacy building, a developer named CRG Holdings. They're offering $1.2 million. All you have to do is come to the bank tomorrow morning and sign a simple trust release. I'll be there to guide you. After that, you'll never have to worry about money again, and I'll personally make sure your pills get refilled. I've already got a pharmacist lined up to resume operations in a new location. You just have to trust me." He smiled, and I saw the lie behind his incisors, a flash of something reptilian and cold. I nodded weakly. "Okay, David, tomorrow I'll sign." But before that meeting, I needed to test something. I needed to know if there was any shred of humanity left in him, any residual sibling bond that might make him pause. So I staged a medical scare. That evening, after David had dropped off the papers, I waited until he and Lisa were in the kitchen, arguing as usual about the pressure of the upcoming meeting. I could hear them through the wall, Lisa saying, "If she bails again, I'm leaving, David. I mean it." And David replying, "She won't. She's practically dead on her feet." I've seen her. One more day. I took a deep breath, then walked out of the guest house and into the main house through the unlocked back door. In the hallway that led to the kitchen, I let my body go limp. I collapsed against the wall, sliding down with a thud, my head lolling, my breathing intentionally ragged. I lay on the floor, eyes half closed, and I heard their footsteps. Then Lisa's voice, sharp. "Oh my God, is she okay?" And David's immediate response, not a cry of alarm, not a rush to call 911, but a flat, annoyed sigh. "Just leave her. I'll get to her in a minute. I need to find the real estate contract first. It's in the office." I felt his footsteps pass within inches of my hand. He stepped over my prone body to get to his office, not to grab a phone, but to retrieve the very documents he planned to use to complete his theft. I heard him open a drawer, riffle papers. Lisa said nothing else. She didn't kneel down. She didn't check my pulse. She just waited until David came back, and then they both stood there, looking down at me like I was a rug they needed to move. After a full minute, I let out a low groan and slowly opened my eyes, as if regaining consciousness. "Oh, Catherine, you gave us a fright," David said, his voice now coated in honey. "You must be more careful. Let me help you up." but I had seen everything. That moment extinguished any residual family loyalty I had felt. There was nothing left but the cold, bright clarity of a woman who knows exactly how the final act will play out. The next morning, I dressed carefully. A simple blouse, a jacket with deep pockets where I stowed my phone, its audio recorder already running, and a digital copy of the trust document on a flash drive. I had also swallowed the last of my emergency beta blocker stash, so I would be alert, my pulse solid and steady. David and Lisa drove me to the downtown branch of First Regional Bank, the one with the marble columns and the hushed acoustics, where wealth was managed and power was brokered. We were shown to a private conference room on the 3rd floor, windows overlooking the city square. A notary, a young man with a practiced smile, was already seated at the end of a long mahogany table. A few minutes later, a man in a sharp suit entered, introduced himself as the attorney for CRG Development, and placed a thick document on the table. He flipped to a page of dense legal text and said, "We just need the consent signatures and the notarized trust release. Then the funds will be wired within 48 hours. David slid the papers toward me. "Right here, Catherine. Signatures on pages 4, 7, and 11. We need your notarized mark on the consent form and a standard power of attorney so I can finalize the transfer. Don't worry, I've reviewed it all." I picked up the pen, a heavy silver instrument, and scanned the top page. My eyes found the wire instruction, a paragraph that directed all sale proceeds to an account in the name of L&D Holdings at a bank in Grand Cayman. I set the pen down. "David, who is L&D Holdings?" His face flickered, a micro-spasm of panic that he quickly buried beneath a smile. "That's just a holding company for the estate, Catherine. Standard practice. The attorney set it up to protect us from tax liability. You don't need to worry about the details." He reached for the pen and tried to push it back into my hand. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering but my voice as steady as a metronome. "You sold my patient list to a company in Florida. You forged my signature on a $200,000 loan. You cut off my medication because you wanted me too sick to fight back. And last night, when I collapsed in your hallway, you stepped over my body to get a document instead of calling for help. I'm not signing anything." David's smile vanished. Lisa let out a brittle laugh. "Catherine, you're being hysterical. We've been taking care of you. We've given you a place to live, food, everything. This is just the stress talking." She looked at the attorney, who had gone very still. David reached for the documents, but I pulled them toward me. "These documents are evidence of wire fraud and elder abuse, and this entire meeting is being recorded." I pulled my phone from my pocket, the red recording light blinking on the screen. The conference room door opened. Margaret Chen walked in, flanked by 2 FBI agents in dark suits and a uniformed bank security officer with a holstered firearm. One agent held up a badge and said, "David Warner, you're under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. You have the right to remain silent." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Lisa started screaming, "This is outrageous. We have a lawyer. We'll sue this entire bank for defamation." But another agent gently placed a hand on her shoulder and began reading her Miranda rights as well. The attorney for CRG grabbed his briefcase, his face pale, and muttered something about rescinding the offer immediately. He wanted no part of this. The notary stood frozen, his stamp hovering in midair, unsure whether to stamp something or flee. David lunged for the papers, perhaps to tear them up, but the lead agent blocked him with a forearm, and within seconds his hands were zip-tied behind his back. He looked at me, and the expression on his face was one I will never forget, pure, condensed disbelief, as if the world had suddenly broken its contract with him. The golden child, the one who could talk his way into anything, undone by the quiet sister who knew how to sweat a copper pipe and pick a filing cabinet lock. The aftermath was methodical and deeply satisfying. David's trial took 9 months. The prosecution presented the forged loan documents, which a forensic document examiner matched to David's laser printer through microscopic toner analysis. The patient list sale agreement with his signature and fingerprint on the corner. The bank records tracing the offshore transfers through 3 intermediary shell accounts, and the damning audio recording my father had stored on that USB drive. I later learned that Dad had hired a private investigator 8 months before he died, a retired police detective who specialized in financial fraud. Dad had grown suspicious of David's sudden spending, a new car, a vacation to Aruba, and the pharmacy's inexplicably declining revenues. The investigator had obtained the bar recording legally, using a body mic during a consensual meeting with David's friend Greg, who turned out to be an informant working off his own charges. Dad had kept the recording as his final insurance policy, and he had instructed the investigator to hold a copy in a secure server, which the prosecution subpoenaed to corroborate the USB drive. David was convicted on 4 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of criminal neglect for willfully denying me necessary medication. The judge, a woman with no patience for white-collar predators, sentenced him to 3 years in federal prison, a higher sentence than the guidelines recommended, citing his egregious abuse of familial trust. He was ordered to pay restitution totaling $512,000 to me and to the defrauded patients, a figure calculated by adding the loan amount, the patient list sale proceeds, and the estimated market value of my lost medications. His MBA was formally revoked by the university after an ethics board review, and he was added to the Office of Inspector General exclusion list, permanently barred from participating in any federal health care program, which effectively ended any future career in pharmacy or medical services. Lisa filed for divorce 2 days after the arrest, but she didn't escape entirely. The evidence showed she had knowingly facilitated the forgery by providing a sample of my signature from an old Christmas card she had fished out of my father's desk. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, got 18 months of probation, and was ordered to perform 300 hours of community service teaching financial literacy to seniors, a cruel irony for a woman who had tried to steal everything from one. Her real estate license was suspended for a year, and she now works as an assistant in a property management office, where her clients are primarily low-income renters who can't afford to sue her. The pharmacy building and its license, once the trust's dead man switch triggered, reverted entirely to my ownership after a swift and uncontested court review. I reopened it 6 months later, after a complete interior renovation and a restocking of generics sourced from ethical distributors. I renamed it Pill of Perjury Apothecary, a name I filed as a DBA with the State Board of Pharmacy, just to make the point permanent. The sign outside is in clean, bold serif font, and below the name is a smaller line that reads, ESD, in the honest memory of Harold Warner. I hired a retired pharmacist named Elaine, a woman who had spent 40 years in community practice, and 2 techs who believed in patient counseling, not just pushing pills. We stock affordable generics, offer free blood pressure checks, and we have a little lending library of health books in the waiting area. But there was one more position to fill. As part of David's supervised release conditions, the judge approved my somewhat unusual request that he serve 1,000 hours of community service working at the very pharmacy he tried to destroy. Every weekday at 7 a.m., a corrections transport drops him off at the back door. He's required to wear a uniform, and I hand him a lab coat that I had specially printed by a uniform supply company. On the back, in heavy black block letters, it reads, Overdosed on lies. He counts tablets at a small table in the back, pills flowing from stock bottles into counting trays, a task that requires meticulous attention and zero authority. He bottles them, caps them, and places them on a shelf for the actual pharmacists to verify. Every shift, he works beside a stack of clear bins labeled with patient names, and he cannot interact with customers. And here's the detail that still makes me smile. Every prescription label we print includes a mandatory disclaimer line required by the court. It prints just below the dosage instructions, in small 8-point type, the docket number from his federal conviction. Pharmacy operated under court supervision, Case 3, 21 CR 00457, USA v. David Warner. Patients notice it sometimes, ask questions, and I get to tell them a version of this story. Why do your labels have a criminal case number? They'll say, and I'll say, because the man who used to own this place tried to kill me for money, and now he counts my pills. Most of them laugh, then they look closer at the lab coat with its printed slogan, and they shake their heads. My heart medication is now free for life because I own the inventory, and my condition has stabilized under proper care. The trust my father built ensures that no one can touch this business without my full, willing, notarized consent, and I've added a provision that any future sale requires a waiting period and independent legal review. That box, the one that started it all, sits on a shelf behind the counter, visible to anyone who cares to look. Inside it now, next to the journal and the USB drive, is a small brass plaque I had engraved at a trophy shop. It reads, "In memory of a machinist who knew which parts would fail." My father, a man who never finished high school but understood metal fatigue and human greed with equal acuity, outsmarted a man with an MBA and a tailor-made blazer. He saw the quiet rot behind David's charm, the stress fractures in his reliability, and left me a note that said, "Save yourself." I did. And in saving myself, I built something that serves this community. A pharmacy where the owner knows your name and your medication history and will never, ever sell your data to a mail-order outfit in Florida. The lesson I carry forward is this: integrity isn't a soft moral virtue, it's a precision instrument. Once you breach its seal, everything else contaminates. Family is not a free pass to poison people, and the most durable revenge is not a dramatic outburst. It's a well-organized, thoroughly documented paper trail, backed by a trust that cannot be broken, and a lab coat with a message printed so large that no one can miss it. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Take care of your heart, in every sense of the word.